Hello, Arawana. Welcome to the Transformational Learning Summit.
Thank you so much, Lorenz. I'm delighted to be here. It's feels like a special conversation, and I'm looking forward to it.
I'm also really looking forward to the conversation. I like to start with this question of what does transformation mean to you?
I think when I think about the word, it has to do more with recognizing that it's not so much that we need to feel that the current, let's say, is flawed and we need to transform it into something more compassionate, more wise. But it's recognizing, the process is recognizing that there's wisdom and goodness and healthiness already in this situation or in this person or in this institution. And how do we recognize that or uncover that or let that shine out in some way? So I think transformation, in my sense of it, or our work, is more about allowing or recognizing the fundamental goodness and humanness and in this world that we live in, and then kind of noticing that how that grows or unfolds or becomes brighter or something like that.
It's an interesting perspective. I think often a word like transformation might have an implication that something changes. You know, there's the metaphor of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly and something dying and becoming something new. And this frame offers, I mean, it might not be entirely different, but something that what actually shifts is just the perspective, that you recognize, you see something that is already always there.
That's right. That's right. That's so the emphasis is on the nature of sanity already in people, the nature of humanness being basically good. Therefore, the recognition of that, or the practice of that, or the almost the faith in that, let's say, strengthens that quality. And then so the transformation is a strengthening of this quality of basic sanity and kindness and care for this world, and which then allows the fears and restrictions and habitual patterns to have a less prominent position in one's ordinary day or ordinary conversation or project, something like that.
Do you think it would be appropriate to say that, I guess, what might be called the insanity is actually the phenomenon of not seeing that, of somehow being disconnected from that
I would
that
say
nature?
I would say that, Lawrence. Sanity is a disconnect from one's own basic heartfulness and groundedness and intelligence, let's say, and therefore not recognizing it in others. Sometimes we've had teachers, right, that kind of see this quality in us that we don't even see in ourselves. And we, as leaders and teachers and friends and parents, have this opportunity to recognize this quality in other people, because we ourselves recognize and are on some kind of path of cultivating that in ourselves.
Do you think that it's possible to really see this quality in others if you haven't discovered it inside yourself?
Well, other people can see it in ourselves, in us,
Mm,
which we
mm,
don't see.
mm,
So sometimes, or it's not even people, like being outside in nature sometimes reminds me that, sitting next to a tree or something reminds me that I'm not just a bundle of bad habits and neuroses. There's actually something else going on here, even though
mm,
sometimes it seems like those are like struggles of that nature are strong, which I'm not denying that they aren't. The degree of suffering and confusion in in people, in us, all of us. Um, but you could either approach it from like, how do we spend a lifetime kind of improving ourselves, or you could say, and trying to get other people to improve themselves, and we call that transformation or change. Or you could take the view that there's sanity and goodness and healthiness already in the system, whether it's
mm,
mind system or a larger system, and pull and shine light on that, and give shout outs to that. And so I think teachers have done that for me, that have recognized something in me that I didn't see to myself. And actually, Lorenz, now in this social presencing theater work and some of the practices that we do, even online, a complete stranger will notice something about something I've offered. In our case, it's a gesture usually, or a movement, and be able to recognize some kind of, they'll say something that isn't, that wakes up an insight that I know
mm,
but I can't access, and someone
mm,
else sees it.
mm,
So it's that process of not only self-recognition, as you said, but it could be that someone else notices it. And I suppose when you ask the question, it has to do with it has to do with probably our own frame of reference, right? If we're always trying to strive to improve and to transform and to change, and to, which many of us, that's our line of work, right? We're somehow in this work called change. um, it's just a different approach, I think. And I'm not saying that that's not a good one. I'm just saying that the one that I'm more interested in exploring as a practitioner and as a um, person here on the planet
mm,
is this other one um, of a little more emphasis on the sanity part.
mm,
And, and I'm not saying that's the truth, Lorenz. There's plenty of evidence that this may not be the truth, but this is
mm,
what gets me out of bed in the morning.
mhm.
What certainly our work in social presencing theater is based upon.
I'm always I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but it's very interesting to me, the intersection of paths that I somehow sense in your life's work. This the spiritual background of your or at least as far as I understand, your time in the Shambhala community, and the role that Buddhism has in your life, and dance and movement and your relationship to your body, and this work that you're in the world of systems thinking. And um, I get a sense that it all kind of comes together in one way or another in social presencing theater, or in this conversation that we're having right now about seeing the inherent health in a system. And I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, the intersection of those threads.
Hmm. Um, hmm. Yeah, there, when it's one's kind of life journey, for whatever the circumstance are, uh, the circumstances have been, it's not that easy to pick them apart exactly.
Mm.
Heavily influenced by the teachings on art that were given by my teacher, who was Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, Tibetan meditation teacher. He was very interested in art. And I was already a dancer at the time, and that had been my path. But this sense of how gesture or a line of poetry or a brushstroke, how important the sense of it what he would say is coming out of nothing.
Mm.
That we didn't just keep building on our habitual patterns, but that we actually could invite this moment of openness, moment of freshness, a moment of not knowing, a moment of possibility, of open space and vastness into every moment. So you could say it's connected to meditation, that we notice that every moment is not just locked into what we think, but that there's a very fresh experience of what we see, of what we hear, what we feel. It's not just the same old, same old, same old trap of being within our conceptual frameworks, our assumptions, our opinions, our likes and dislikes, all the things that we were taught in the past. And in a way, this relates to what in the presencing work, Otto Scharmer calls learning from the future. It's not always relying on everything we've learned in the past and all the conditioning this lifetime, ancestral, collective, and family of origin, education, socioeconomic, all the stuff that builds this structure that we call me. But that at any moment there could be openness from that. It could be a much bigger sense of awareness and knowing and care than what is scripted from my identity. And not that identity isn't important. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that there's also openness. And that's a view, but it has pervaded our work in terms of embodied knowing, which really trusts in the sense perceptions, in the felt sense of something that we see or hear, that it doesn't immediately become a conceptual, meaning-making interpretation, but that it stays within this simplicity of just the experience. So that is somewhat of a link between a meditative practice and view and how to live in life. But the art practices, and in my case, dance, was a way of practicing and exploring that this sense of openness and not knowing. So then when I met Otto, which was 20 years ago, and the people who were working in systems change, it was a way of bringing this kind of practice into how people are together, the being together practices. And that transformation, let's say, and particularly transformation in learning, is somehow connected to this sense of suspending, suspending what we know in terms of learned knowing, so that this more open, maybe even, I'm not sure, I would call it intuitive, but a certain kind of felt sense, to use a word from the focusing community, felt sense of this moment is kind of brings this heart quality into every present moment, but openness and warmth, let's say, or openness and or curiosity and care brings that to every moment. And in terms of systems transformation, or learning, this sense of loving this world seems to be how we learn, right? That it's not just how quickly you can think, but it's also has to do with caring about something. So we're just trying to, in the systems work that Presencing Institute is doing, and certainly the work that you're doing as well, we're interested in this, quality of relationship, the quality of the relationships, the quality, let's say, of this conversation as a way of learning and as a way of transforming our, you know, our society, basically, our social, we call social fields or social contexts. So that's how the three are connected, if that isn't too rambly.
No, really, really beautiful. And there's so many directions we could go from here. There's something for me that I would love for you to expand on a little bit, which is um, this territory between the felt sense and the narrative conceptual sense. I feel like you also use the word love, and there's something in that space of where we started the conversation, the innate goodness that feels very close to the nature of the felt sense. And I'd love to have you expand a little bit on um, why why becoming aware of or somehow in deeper relationship with this felt sense quality is significant.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of trust in the sensing body, and why we spend so much time on embodiment, that that the body houses the sense perceptions, and that perception, whether it's seeing or hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, or like this feeling quality, felt quality, it's for a moment it's free of concept. It's just open. I look out, I'm looking out a window, I see this kind of white tree, and for a moment it doesn't mean anything other than that there's an open connection between us, between the tree and me, and that, I think we're saying that that is trustworthy information. So there's a moment that we're with each other, like you and I are here now, in which there's a moment that we experience one another, but it's without interpretation. It doesn't actually mean anything other than that we're looking at these little squares and we see each other, and there's some quality of knowing, there's some quality of connection, and even though without having to think about why or what it means. So that we're saying that is incredibly intelligent, that initial sense of connection, and that that isn't, it isn't filtered through a conceptual framework, as it's as a little moment of freedom from that, let's say, that there's just an experience of something. And then of course I'm just talking about a little flash moment, because then everything comes in terms of what it means and what it's called. And I love the title of this book. I think I have the title correct. It's a book about the work of the American artist named Robert Irwin. The title of the book is um, seeing is forgetting the name of what you see, something like that. Seeing is forgetting the name of what you see. That it's just this open quality of that, of hearing, let's say, music, or hearing a bird, or seeing, you know, a flower, or seeing a homeless person. There's an immediate flash of something. And that flash, we're calling this kind of openness and open felt quality. And then it, it closes up and we have ideas. But we're saying that that knowing and that being able to rest a little bit in that kind of maybe a slightly non-conceptual way of knowing is connected to creative process, and it's connected to transformation. And it's just connected to, the aesthetic of living. And I'm using the word aesthetic not to mean beauty particularly, but in its original meaning, that aesthetic, the word means feeling, right? That an anesthetic is a numbness. An aesthetic is a sense of feeling, the felt quality of something. And that, I don't mean emotional particularly, but it's a bigger feeling than just emotion, or whether I like it or don't like it, but there's just a moment of open felt connection with the world. And I think that's somehow connected to this topic, and it's connected to embodiment, why we put so much emphasis on the body being grounded, the body being connected to the Mother Earth body, the sense of being able to rest the body on the earth when we're sitting or standing, that we're not just always living in our thought world, but that we can actually feel our feet and our legs and our belly and our back, and feel that this body is full of knowing.
Can you share a little bit about how that comes together in social presencing theater, and maybe explain, maybe not everyone watching is entirely familiar with what social presencing theater is, but can you share a little bit how that lands in that practice, and also how it maybe integrates some of this, I don't want to use the word artistic, but some aspect of the arts with social change, or somehow seeing a system.
Yeah. I do think of it as an art form. Then I probably think that living is kind of an art form. So maybe a broader sense. That living is a moment-to-moment creative process, making choices, and those choices are not always just practical. The choices have to do with, again, a certain kind of feeling or aesthetic, where we place things, what we wear, what we buy, what we eat, what we engage in is political, of course, as well, but it's also aesthetic, I think. In terms of social presencing theater, for the social part is that we do it usually in small groups, in groups. The practice is not just an individual embodiment practice. And presencing is this word that's is a made-up word that is a combination of sensing, which is what we just have been speaking of, the sensing body, and presence. And presence is an interesting word because it's has to do with being present, but it also indicates that each of us has, or each of us is a certain kind of presence that is not just, ending with our skin, but that there's a quality of being that is that communicates. And so we feel that in each other. We feel this presence. I think it was Maya Angelou that said they won't remember what you said, but they will remember how they felt in your presence. And so we can feel that in people. We can feel their presence. So it's presencing, it indicates this sense of, for me, it indicates how really powerful we all are in terms of being able to engage with one another in change, that we actually are not helpless. Even if we don't know what to do, there's some sense of just our being present for people, being present in our life, that already has some kind of transformational capacity. The word theater is, again, we're using its origin. The origin of that word is a place where something becomes visible. And so we're not talking about the theater in terms of acting and professional theater, but we are very in the way that thoughts and words are not visible, but bodies are visible. And the structures and the patterns that people make socially are visible. So that defines the kind of work. And then the work is actually a series of practices. And there are probably 4 types. One is really just about embodied presence, and that's more personal. But then there's also a set of practices that are around, let's say, the awareness of the social field, the sort of spatial, social configurations that we make, because how we move around in the space and the physical placement is full of communication, but we're usually looking at people's faces and listening to what they say, and we don't pay attention actually to this spatial embodied conversation that's also going on at the same time. And then there's a set of practices for personal, what we would say personal transformation, being the stuck practice. We refer to it that way, like everybody has is sort of caretaking some kind of stuck, as though that were a noun, a stuck. And so what is that? Like if we really said, wow, this is such a great opportunity. I have a stuck and I have a challenge, I have an obstacle, or we have this. If we could say, oh, let's just take a look at that. Let's just really turn our attention and lean in there and listen. What's going on in there? What's actually happening? And if we do that with this kind of body knowing, so that we're not, again, interpreting and projecting what we think, but we keep with this not knowing attitude. We keep with the listening, not knowing, spaciousness, because we're saying that in that stuck is this kind of wisdom, is the insight that we need to move forward. But we often try to get rid of our stucks. So there's a series of practices around this personal transformation, and then then there's a systems mapping practice, which is called 4D or 4-dimensional systems mapping, which is more on systems, like an exploration of a system, someplace where there's stuckness or conflict or struggle or challenge or obstacle or something like that. And again, setting up the stakeholders in that, and if they do not think so much about it, but actually stay with their embodied knowing of this spatial relationship of the various stakeholders, what is it that they might notice there in terms of their own choice making? So those are the 4 categories of social presencing theater. And it's, of course, wonderful if we can do this in groups in person, but we also have been able to design things that people can do online.
There's
It's a
something.
common, yeah,
Go ahead.
maybe just say that it's based in the Presencing Institute. And there have been many colleagues and friends that have worked on this and created it and make changes for different contexts. And it is connected tightly with the change theory U and theory U, which is that change theory that the Presencing Institute work is based on.
There's something really profound, almost mystical, and I hesitate to use that word, but I'm going to see what you have to say about it, about the practice and about what it implies, the way that a system can show up in your body, and the way that your body can express some facet of the system in a way that offers unique insight, something there that I feel is in some way you encounter it and you discover, wow, there's something there, and but I feel like also if you look more deeply, you then have a question of, well, how is it that it is there? How is it that there is this innate intelligence in the body that somehow communicates something in this way about something that is external to it? And I wonder if you can speak to that, to your observation of that phenomenon.
Huh. Um, I have to say, Lawrence, I don't actually think about how it is, why it
Hmm.
is. I mean, why it's in the body. I do think about why, like what it is that that we're connecting to,
Hmm.
and and this it's almost like the maybe it's let's just for thinking about them, about this a little bit together. Maybe we could say that awareness, awareness just is. Oftentimes in my experience is that you can like train mindfulness. You can become more mindful, more, mind can rest more on, for instance, the body or something like that. And certainly in mindfulness practices, we understand that it has to do with being able to rest one's attention somewhere. But awareness in a certain way, I mean, is just how it is to be a human, to be aware. We could have a vaster sense or a smaller sense, but there's always awareness. And there's something about, maybe we could say that awareness isn't, it doesn't have any territory or boundary. And that therefore there's in the world, there's some kind of positive, good energy, let's say. And maybe if we are not so restricted by our concepts and opinions and assumptions, and we can relax a little in just an embodied shape. I think for those of us that aren't familiar with social presencing theater, we could be invited to make a body shape that that we feel is communicating to us and to others a particular, let's say, stakeholder in a system, right? And then we don't know what that is. There's no handbook on this, but we have a sense. Okay, maybe it's a big shape. maybe it has its hands wide open, maybe it's looking down, maybe it's lying down. Like we just have a sense that maybe this for us at this moment would embody this particular stakeholder. And then we have several of these together. And they make a relationship, let's say 6 of them together in different roles. And then we're asking them to drop their ideas about what we think this role means and just use our, what we call our sensing antennae to sense, like, where do we belong in the system really? Where is it that would be a space that we feel we belong? Is it over here? Is it standing up? Is it lying down? Is it being close to that one? And then we also have some words that come out of that, like these kind of I voice words that, I mean, a short phrase that might express something. Now, the question I think is that I understand it, Lorenz, is how does this connect to a bigger sense of knowing? How does this allow the system to see itself with more depth and more openness that could then generate a more creative conversation or a deeper conversation to get underneath the surface of the issues, whatever they are, to like the really shared, what sometimes the word we use in presencing is the source of something. That there isn't, probably most of us on the planet are not trying to develop, to make bad families, troubled families. We're not trying to make inefficient and really damaging school systems. People, nobody wants to destroy the planet. This is an assumption. I don't know this, Lawrence. Maybe there are people that that's their goal in life, but let's say for most of us. So how does that connect to a positive energy that then could, this little sculpture 1, which is a current situation, into sculpture 2, which is some kind of possible potential, how does that attract or amplify positive energy that empowers people to go about then their life and their work with more renewed kind of energy and direction and sort of faith in the goodness of this world and the importance of engaging in order to continue to put positive energy and creative energy into the changes that need to happen. So there's something about what we do that attracts positive energy, and we need it. We need to attract it, and then we need to be able to feel like that radiates out. Certainly what you're doing here with these series is that, right? We bring conversations and we bring people together, and it creates positive energy and more courage and more gentleness and more intelligence and wisdom. And we need that. So I don't know whether I would call that mystical, but it's really, but it is saying that it's not just, we're not just isolated people trying to push a rock up a hill here, but that we're, as a collective, we have collective knowing and collective agency to, to help out on the planet, which goodness knows needs it. Yeah, I'm not sure that's even touching on what you asked, but
I think it is. And I mean mystical simply in the implication of how the whole shows up within oneself, of how, it implies a certain innate connectivity that from the perspective of just like an isolated individual,
yes,
wouldn't be there, but is. And also what I'm getting is maybe it doesn't matter to know how it works. There's also some sort of agency that shows up, doing a practice like SBT isn't Netflix. It isn't watching something. It's being a direct participant and observing how something expresses itself inside your body as some kind of feeling in conjunction with other people that are also participating. And so there's a certain implied agency in
Yeah,
or expressed agency. It's not even implied. It's you're actually
yeah,
you have an agency in the moment, and that I think that's very enlivening.
yes. It's a doing, definitely, Lorenz. It's a practice, and practices are things you do.
Mm,
So it has that, yes, engagement quality, and it's collective, as you say. And it's yeah, it also I think it strengthens the social fabric and the sense, as you just said, that we're not just individuals. It's such a peculiar concept that we're all
mm,
just like little pockets of individuality, which is what we tend to think, right? And
mm,
yet we're so interconnected and with everything and everybody. And in anything that invites us to remember that, in the way that the invitation to remember that the body mind are a living system, and that we're always in these social, what we call social bodies, whether we're on the subway or in a family or in a team at work. This is a social body, and those social bodies, we're always interconnected, and we're always interconnected to nature and to, there isn't any um, there isn't any separate in that way, and yet, we tend to think that. So that's a real problem.
mm. I've heard you use the word social field, which is I know it's a word from the presencing universe. Is that what you mean by social field?
Yes, the social field is like the quality of the relationship. When I say social body, I'm really talking about the bodies,
Mm,
the social body, the members of the team, or um, the visible, right? The visible structures.
mm,
And when I talk about the social field, I'm talking about the quality of the relationship. And then we could also say that there's this awareness source, that it all comes out of this quality of awareness and the quality of open knowing, not knowing,
mm.
uh, attending in that way. And sometimes, Lorenz, I just think what we just need to relax more, because there's relaxation that then is more opening, right? And not trying
Mm,
to get to the goal and get it to change and get that person to change and get ourselves to change. And so much goal orientation of how it would be better if things were different. And then sort of forgetting to actually notice, or if we could just relax a little bit, you could notice also the wisdom and goodness that's present now. It's not something that in the future we're going to connect with, but it's present now as well. If we could just give it a little space and yeah, a little relaxation maybe. And obviously, I don't mean just flopping down in front of the TV, but I mean just sitting at the window and looking out and appreciating your life for a moment.
good.
We had a big,
Would
we had a big snowstorm here, and it was so beautiful in the country,
mm,
quiet and light, and it was so beautiful and calm. And then, of course, it immediately comes to mind about so many people on this planet that whose life is not beautiful and not calm, and
mm.
so much struggle and suffering, and all of that is in every moment, right?
what do you feel is the intersection of what you're describing there, this invitation to relaxation and um, how that can be found or somehow connected to in a group space in the context of learning? You know, what is the expression of learning in an experience like social presencing theater, and also this element of restfulness or relaxation that might contribute to that.
On a call recently, someone said, the key to learning is love. He said that, we learn because we have a certain kind of affection, not only for the material, but for the teacher, right? The teacher-student relationship, or I think that is the same as for healing or for coaching, or that the methodology is not as important as the quality of the relationship. And we're starting to bring the social presencing theater work actually more into not only higher education context, but into K through 12, particularly I'm working in the 7th grade through 12th grade. And so we're bringing the practices into the institution of learning. And again, trying to explore the I guess you could just say that's this sense that learning happens also within just, the name of our project is called Being Together.
Mm.
And it actually had to do with the fact that when I have been in schools before, and we make this body on the floor, and we ask the young people, where do you spend your time? In the head, in the heart, in the legs? They all go to sports on the legs, and head in the study. And there's not an actual sense that, I mean, people actually don't go to the heart area. And I was really curious about this, like, why is that? And it had to do with the fact that partly that, people understand if you do sports, you get better and the team gets better and whatever. And if you do academic work, you get, you progress. But there wasn't any sense of being together as being anything, like, yeah, I have friends and, like this, and the social media and the family and whatnot. But it doesn't, the art form, the art of being together is something that I certainly didn't learn in school. And it is its own, it's its own art form, being together, in terms of how and what we attend to, specifically around listening and openness to others. And in a funny way, this lack of ambition, like the other two have to do with working hard. You study hard, you do sports hard. But being with people has something to do with being able to relax enough to actually feel the connection, and to not always be thinking about, whether you like or don't, and whether they're different or not, and all of the different things that we, have frameworks around in terms of, being together with other people, people we don't like, people we don't trust, people we don't know that well, people we don't agree with, people who, all of these different things. And yet we need to all live together on the planet. And we need to be able to be open to and have some sense of warmth, to one another for no reason, just because we're human beings living on the planet. And to some extent, it requires a little bit of relaxation, relaxing our like opinions about people and our, habit of trying to find how they're different, how
Mm.
they're the same. Do we like, are they fitting into our pattern of what is to be a friend or a relationship? But to just suspend this a little bit so we can actually feel what it is to be with other people and not have so many opinions about that. So in the school, we're working with this sense of just what it is to be together, some little practices, and it does again have to do with being in the body and actually resting in the space with other people, little bits of silence, little practices that bring in more kind of less judgmental ways, like this check-in, I think it's probably from Art of Hosting, around weather, describing one's experience as weather, or describing one's experience as a color, or and then just to get more openness and more playfulness in the learning process. Now, how this is going to work with teaching history or math, we're collaborating with the teachers in the school on that in terms of learning. But we are, in the end, we're really interested, Lorenz, in young people being having some training in what it is to be a global citizen, what it is to have agency, collective agency in addressing climate change, in addressing racism, socioeconomic inequality. We need people. We need young people coming out of school and say, "Hey, this is needs to happen, and it needs to happen, but I need to be engaged in that." So it's like the sense that if we're more present, embodied ourselves, we're more open to including others in our social field who may not be exactly like us, because we need to work together in order to create a good world, in order to again recognize the goodness in this world and emphasize that in a way that we can have an impact. So that's kind of the sense of, and maybe I'm touching in the sense of how important it is to have space and time and gaps in accomplishment and resting a little bit in order to be fully human, in order then to have agency to actually help out.
Mm. You mentioned math and history, and you saying you don't know how necessarily that fits in there. I wonder if you've done any exploration of how embodied practices might intersect or support more technical learning like that. Because that's always a question that I have, is how can it supplement a more technical subject matter? And I wonder if you've actually explored that at all.
I haven't worked in schools, Lorenz, myself in a number of years. I used to work in schools, but specifically with dance or with diversity work. Um, so I don't know the answer to this, and this is why we're doing this as a collaboration with
Mm.
teachers. I'm not a classroom school teacher, and having so we have a team of others right now, particularly in one school, but others who are actually classroom teachers, and then that'll be a collaboration. We'll see. One of our practitioners and friends in the social presencing community is a Waldorf teacher for many years. And so within that very, good environment for experimenting with different kinds of art forms and content. She has been able to do quite a lot around both history and math. But that's my only example of a person that's really brought this into the school. And in her case, it's in Norway, and it's Waldorf, so you sort of can't get a better education content than that. But we're at the beginnings of this, and so I'm looking forward to it, and looking forward to other people taking this forward. I'm very happy to get it started and have the opportunity to do that in terms of bringing social presencing theater into K through 12 education. But I certainly am looking forward to other people taking it forward. I'm kind of with my colleague Ricardo Dutra. We have designed things for schools in the past, and we're in that process now of designing little short practices that teachers can do within the classroom. And it's a collaboration with the teachers in terms of what they're reflecting on, what did they notice, how can they bring this into their classroom. One is a math teacher, one is a history teacher, and then also how to evaluate both impact and both the outcome in terms of our learning outcomes, but also how would we know whether this really supports this larger view of, let's say, global citizens, really. I mean, in this kind of flourishing, education for flourishing people, and for creating and supporting students who can really engage in the world. Yeah.
How do you approach that usually, whether you're working in this context of a school, or I imagine often in the context of an organization, in terms of measuring an outcome or income or impact?
Yeah, I have no idea. This is the beginnings of it, Lawrence. So we're in the, Presencing Institute, one of its kind of, I don't know what you call it, but one of its
Mandates
offerings, is research.
is research.
So, yes, one is capacity building, which is more my area. I teach workshops in social presencing theater for people who are consultants or coaches or teachers or leaders who might feel that they would like to bring more of this embodied knowing into their context. And then Presencing Institute also provides consulting and application of a variety of methods to organizations and institutions. And then the third part is research, and a research journal, and a team was led by Eva Pomeroy that is trying to contribute to research. So this is the big question. First of all, how do you do awareness-based research? How is it different than research, traditional research? And what is it that we're actually kind of trying to evaluate? So there is work, of course, on this that many institutions are doing, but in the case of the teachers that we're working with now, we're really asking them, how would you see this? How do you see this unfolding for these young people? And so we'll see what happens. Our research is often kind of arts-based, and there's a field now of arts-based research. So it is around this area of images, photographs, sculptures, little performances, stories that are are trying to paint a picture of what it is, to be um, a young person who feels that that collectively they have agency to change the world.
Mm.
So we'll let you know how it goes.
So you're somehow trying to measure that felt sense of agency.
I'm not certain that this is my particular interest
Mm.
personally. Um, but I do feel it would be important if we could articulate that for
Mm.
others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't need to see brain research that said that mindfulness and awareness and compassion were a good thing for the planet. I didn't need to have proof of,
Mm.
neuroscience proof that this was the case. I didn't need that because I had a particular kind of faith, but not everybody does, and research is very important to many
Mm.
people.
I really
Institutions.
appreciate that.
I appreciate it.
In the domain of I guess you could call this playfulness, maybe not, but I'm curious about your perspective. So one of the attributes you mentioned of social presencing theater was this stuck exercise, this stuck activity, which I mean, many people in the audience may or may not be familiar with it. So you might you kind of shared it already today. But I'm in my own practice, I've used many variations of this, and I'm curious about how you feel about variations of the practice. And I'll share an example. It's kind of like a stuck thing, but we were working with a community where there had been a major rupture, and people were on either side of that rupture and having a great deal of difficulty having a conversation without getting agitated. And so one of the practices that we invited people to do was to express with their bodies what was present for them, and then I believe also we also had them transition into a new shape. What's the highest future possibility of the situation? So kind of a stuck version, I guess. But it was really powerful in the way that first it allowed something to be expressed that was maybe a little bit beyond words, but then in the second wave that really allowed something to be made visible that was maybe too much for people to handle with verbal communication. And I've really been touched by that experience ever since.
Yeah, that that would uh, that would seem like a good variation,
Mm.
not that far from. The only difference in ours might be that we work with the journey between the one and the second one,
Mm-hmm.
between the current situation where they're stuck, and then what kind of movement goes from what, so we call that the sculpture one, and then what you said is the highest potential we would call the sculpture two. And in this case, you're defining what the highest potential is, or you're saying sculpture two is something that has to do with if you were like free of this situation, or however you just defined it. And that seems fine. So there's a kind of saying that one is where you are now, and two is, and then you can say what you
Mm.
think two is, and that's fine. And then they make these two sculptures, seems fine. I think one of the things that we have worked with in that practice that might be slightly different is the same for the one, and oftentimes, um, it isn't necessarily about an emotion in our case, which it can be, as you said, but it has to do with the fact that there's systemic forces that, and those are both external and internal, that keep a person stuck.
Mm.
And so I often am saying in my context that I'm doing this, what do the forces feel like? Do they feel like they're pressing you down? Do they feel like they're pulling you apart? Do they feel like you're twisting? Your vision is one way, but your action is the other way. Do you feel you have conflicting loyalties that are pulling here and pulling there? So it's more, not exactly abstracted, but it's more around a recognition that no one is stuck by themselves. There are forces, both inner and outer, that prevent someone from moving. So he takes it out of this thing like I'm stuck with my issue, right? Like that identify, I am stuck. You identify yourself with the stuck. I am
Mm,
stuck. We're trying to get out of that to say that there are forces, inner and outer forces, that prevent you from moving. And what does it feel like if you could feel those forces pushing, pulling, pressing? What would that feel like, right? So it's a little bit more within the framework of systems than than specifically around an emotional feeling. But you can certainly do it either way. And you could also frame an emotional feeling of, of like pressures. Do you feel pressure on the chest, or do you feel like the pressure is pushing your head down, and that kind of thing?
mm,
So you're working with the embodied knowing of it, right?
mm,
And then in a kind of one way of doing this would be without setting the goal, setting two, not defining what two is, which is one way of doing it, what you just did, which is great. But another way of doing it, and probably the way it's described in the book and also in the videos, these are all open source for anybody that's interested. The videos are open source, and the description of this stuck, that the person then moves from one, and then they move until they feel they can stop somewhere. So it's not a very long journey. It's like you're saying, we're sensing in, and then we let go of our ideas of what we think it should be or what it means or anything like that. We let go. We have this open sort of presencing, not knowing, and then we let some movement start. And the movement itself will go on for, a little bit, a few seconds, and then it stops in what we call the sculpture two. And then the sculpture two has a voice. It says a word or a phrase. So the sculpture two is not set. It's just open, and it basically, just gives you a reflection about the journey itself, a little bit more than the reflection on the two sculptures. But it could be either
mm,
way. I think what you did was great, and there are many ways of playing with this and adapting it. And then one thing that we do, of course, is we do it in little teams. So 3 people together make us stuck, or the one person says, could the 2 of you help me feel more stuck by putting pressure here or pulling
mm,
here? And then again, we're emphasizing the systems. And then we recognize that the 3 of them together are one stuck system. And then the system moves from sculpture 1 to sculpture 2. And then each person says their word or phrase. So
mm.
I think that's the only difference of it, is that it's a little bit more within this framework of nobody's stuck by themselves. And the
I,
stuck has its own wisdom.
I really appreciate that nobody is stuck by themselves. It's kind of obvious, but it's really easy to
Yeah.
to to
I
overlook.
heard,
And
I heard Thomas Hubel say recently, I was had a in these many online situations, which I had the privilege or pleasure of tuning in. He said, "Oh, emotions aren't personal." I
mm,
love this.
mm,
Emotions aren't personal. They're like in. So I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but for me, it meant, I think he was talking about more ancestral and collective, like historic. But it's also, I was thinking, well, they're just in the room, and they just happen to be floating about emotions, and they latch onto people. And
mm,
then that
mm.
comes through that person, but it's much more collective than that, I think, too. So
How how do you think, um, the practice of, say, taking on the first sculpture, how does that intersect with that territory we were talking about between the felt sense and the narrative that someone might create? So here I am in my stuck situation and I have this narrative about it. How
Yeah.
does the practice help either make that visible or somehow work with
Yeah.
that?
Or it just shifts attention, I think, Lorenz, that you can't think about the narrative and be in the body at the same time. You
Mm.
can't dance and think at the same time. I can tell you
Mhm.
that.
And that should be like a bumper sticker.
Dance and think at the same time. So it's like there's two different things going on there. If it has to do with, again, mindfulness awareness. If the mindfulness is in the body itself, and the awareness is in the openness of this little system, whether that's just in your own body or you have two or three other people that you're attending to, that's where your attention is, right? And then your attention is, oh, the shoulder is doing this. Oh, that moves the arm here. The arm is here, and I can feel it. Like I'm tracking feeling, and then something drops down here, and then this ridges up. I'm not saying the words, of course, but I'm tracking feeling. So my attention is on the feeling journey. Oh, yes, and now the body is bending over, and then it's stretching out, or it's about not only my body, but I'm attending to the other three in the sculpture, let's say, or four. I don't have time to think about my story. I don't have
Mm,
my mind can't do two things at once. It can't latch onto the story and believe in the story and stay with the experience.
mm,
So it just
mhm,
boycotts the story. That's all.
mhm,
So you have the story. It's like playing in the background there somewhere, but it's not as loud as the actual experience of moving from one to two with these people.
mhm,
So that's the loyalty. The loyalty is, and the faithfulness is to the experience,
mm,
the embodied experience now in the present. And it's not that my loyalty is not to the story. The story is there. That's fine, and we have all sorts of concepts and opinions, and they're not going to go away exactly, but it makes them less loud. It makes the actual experience of moving from one to two with these people the most vivid,
mhm,
and it is the vividness that we're going to go with this time. So
mhm,
what does the vividness have to say about this? Not what does the chattering mind have to say about this, that it remembers this and who did this to what and whatever. It's the vividness of this tiny moment of experience that has a voice, and it has something to say about what's going on. So we're listening to that voice for a moment. And
mm,
then conversation with the others in your team, or if you're like writing a little haiku or writing a little journal, if it's just individually or you're sharing with one person or however you're reflecting on this, it's about the experience, not about the like the narrative. So we're suspending, and this is true for all presencing work, you're suspending meaning making, you're suspending interpretation, you're suspending your judgment enough to get a new and a fresh perspective. So, and that perspective comes from your own insight, but it also can come from other people.
mm. I know we're at the top of our time. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, I'm enjoying the conversation,
Okay,
Lawrence.
good. Just wanted to
Thank you
make
for
sure.
such interesting questions.
I'm really enjoying this conversation too. I'm curious what you've learned. A couple of things. I'll bundle two items into one question. One is, as far as I understand, you've been cultivating this body of work called social presencing theater for the last 20 years, working with Otto Scharmer and the Presencing Institute. So I'm curious about what is immersion, what you've learned, how that work has evolved during that time, and then most specifically, I imagine since COVID and the whole world going online, and this, I imagine, quite a lot of that work becoming um, explored online in a new way, what you've learned about doing this kind of work online.
Oh, goodness, that's a big question. I mean, certainly the question around what is evolved is a bigger question, and could be taken from different perspectives. From as a facilitator, what have I learned? As a practitioner, as a community, what have we learned? Um, something that just pops to my mind here is something about appreciating that some, that being, for in the US particularly, but in other places too, the sense of, you know, having this body approach can be uncomfortable for people. It's not the way that they normally learn. It's not where they feel their sense of confidence lies. Many people say, oh, I don't feel my body. Oh, this is very uncomfortable for me to do this. Or I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing because there's no prescribed goal.
Hmm.
So it could be both on the body sense, but also the fact that it isn't, it emphasizes this emergence and not, and so there isn't any right or wrong. These are things that can throw people. So I think over the years I'm just appreciate anything that anybody does. For sometimes people, it just getting up and standing up is horrifying for people. So I just appreciate people's courage, and it might not have the depth that I feel is possible, but I'm just delighted that anybody does anything, to tell you the truth. And so I think the the practices themselves, I think, have deepened in terms of their potential. I feel like we need to simplify some things over the years. Um, it is a time, after about of this sort of 20 years, it's good. It's a time for reflection. So I hope we get a chance to do this um, more. Um, I think, we clarified in the book, Social Presencing Theater, we tried to clarify the view of the practices and kind of the initial how to do them. And then, as you say, there are many variations, and we appreciate that. Um, yeah, in terms of online, I would be the first person to say that this wouldn't work, but that wasn't an option. We we got online at the beginning of COVID. I have fantastic partners, Manish Srivastava and Angela Baldini and others, and we just jumped in and we said, okay, what can we do? And I'm really surprised at how much communication and sense of connection is possible online, and how much of it we could do online. And now, over the past 2 years, we've developed a systems mapping process online with a new tool and method and a virtual mapping, which we're incredibly kind of excited about. It was a huge amount of work and a wonderful team. What you cannot do online, of course, is know the spatial relationships between people and which direction they're facing.
Mhm.
You don't know how far they are. You can't tell that um, on the screen. So there are certain things that I love about our work, which have to do with this spatial knowing, social field knowing, the practice we call the village, for instance. And then in that case, it's um, that part is not, we haven't solved that yet.
Mm.
So we did it in 4D mapping, in that there's an actual little visual map and you can move figures around as to where you're
Mhm.
going.
Mhm.
But in terms of the unfolding of choices people make in a spatial room of, let's say, 10, 20 people, in that particular practice was one that we cannot do. And I miss that. But
Mm.
other than that, many others, we were very surprised at how well they work online. And of course, we're very pleased that there's accessibility,
Mhm,
that,
mhm.
that, people have access, and it's expensive to get all people in rooms, whether it's in a workshop or in a practice group, or people, have
Mhm.
to travel and have to find a space, and,
And in my
making,
experience, the practice most of our work with the practice and variations of it has been online, and we find that it's also surprisingly powerful. I think, yeah, I'd like to end on this final question for you, which because you talked about the not specialty, but spatiality of of a space, and I've heard you talk about the concept of ma, and I would love to invite you to um, share a few words about that because I think it's related.
oh yeah, it's related.
Mhm.
So ma is a Japanese word. The character is a torii gate, a gate with the sun coming through. That's the kanji for it. And it translates as a gap or an interval. So it's an empty space between things. So it could be between words or between objects, between events. But it's an open space. And in the theater or in films, which it's a basic aesthetic principle, and traditional aesthetic principle, and very prominent in the theater, traditional theater, like no theater, and in films like of the early 1930s of Ozu, Mizoguchi, these filmmakers, in which there would be an activity and then there's just a pause. Nothing much is going on there. And then the activity or the dialogue, and then there's a pause. And so the pause, the gap or interval, allows for this shared heightened perception or kind of deepening of feeling. So it's part of the design of anything really, but let's say of what we're doing with social presencing theater, that there are always these gaps that allow for shared knowing and shared feeling, felt quality. Again, I'm not necessarily talking about emotion, but this felt quality of this experience that we share. And then from that open space, the next thing can be said or done. So it is emphasizing the sense of space, again, as you said, Lorenz, but in this sort of time container of
Mm,
a gap or an interval. Yeah.
mm,
So sometimes it's a time space interval. It's
mm,
called.
mm. I love that. I feel like that's a perfect note to end on,
Mm.
and also the feedback that we often get in our um, group experiences is that people really appreciate the spaciousness of it. And
Yeah.
I think there's something um, when we think about learning, there's this context of content and usually trying to put as much as possible into the experience. That's the value that it offers. And maybe less emphasis on the spaciousness to discover the relationship that we might have to that content and the many nuances and subtleties around that. Um, and there's something very easy to overlook and yet so significant, I think, in that spaciousness.
Yeah,
Mm.
beautifully said.
Thank you, Arawana, for our time together today. I really appreciate having this. I may really feel like just a deep privilege to connect with you in this way and have this really insightful conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
I feel the same, Lorenz. I really, really appreciated thinking about these things and having the conversation with you. Thank you so much for the whole series of interviews, and really looking forward to to listening to many of them. So thank you so much for including me.